All right, well, it is 6 o'clock, so welcome to the official Safe Sanctuary webinar. Thank you all for coming. I wanted to go ahead and get started. Um, and okay, I'm gonna attempt to share my screen because I do have a PowerPoint, and it is mostly to keep me on task and make sure that we cover all the things. So let's see if I can make this happen. Oh, did I do it? Am I screen sharing? Okay. So I made everybody introduce themselves. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Corney. I'm the pastor of Hopewell Moravian Church. I'm also project facilitator with the CCD, working on helping everyone update their safe sanctuary policies. Um, I don't know how to put this on presenter view, so if you can't see it, just let me know. Um, Let's see. Oh, I promised you guys a story. So when I was growing up, way back in the 90s, I remember visiting a church and I went to Sunday school and it was two teachers, which is great. And I was coloring, which was great. I was, I think, 4 years old. So coloring was an appropriate activity. And one of the teachers had to leave the room. And I don't know why, maybe to get something or go to the bathroom. And as soon as she left the room, the other teacher grabbed my arm really hard. And I don't know why, because I was doing exactly what they told me to do, but she grabbed my arm really hard and she said, "Come on, let's go. It's time to go." And I was like, "Oh, where are we going?" And she didn't answer me. And the other teacher came back in the room because she had forgotten something. And that person, the adult who grabbed my arm, their face totally changed and they smiled and they were like, "Oh, that's such a pretty picture." And I remember feeling really confused and wondering what had happened. And looking back, I still don't know. I don't have all the details. I was a child. But that was a situation where obviously having another adult in the room helped that other teacher do better. And so that is my why for why I really advocate for there always being two adults in a room with kids. Okay, this used to be a slide that was at the end of this presentation, but the last shall be first. I've moved it up because I want you to hear this part. This is the task that is before you to, first of all, read the new provincial policy. Um, there is a new provincial policy. It was published, I think, back in March. It's on the CCD website. I can send you a link or a direct copy of it. So take a look at that policy, and I'm also going to tell you about it. And then, in light of that policy, in light of what you read in that policy, check your congregation's policy and update it so that it coheres with the new provincial policy. And then your third task is to train your staff and volunteers. So it's no good to have a new policy if no one knows what that policy says. Okay, but you have options. Everyone has a unique situation. We have churches here who are pretty large. We have churches who are much smaller. And so your unique situation is going to determine what you need to do. But basically, you have three options. You can update your current policy. This is going to be your best bet if your policy is already pretty up to date. So if you just updated it, I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, and it doesn't need a whole lot of reworking, the easiest thing for you to do is to probably update your current policy. Your second option is to write a whole new policy. This might be the best choice for you if you don't have a policy at all, which I know there are some folks who either don't have one or can't find the policy that they potentially may have had in the past. Um, And this might be the best option for you if you're looking at the provincial policy and you're like, oh, what about this? What about the school that meets in our building? What about if you have a lot of unique scenarios that you're thinking in your head, okay, but what about that? That's a sign that you might need to write a new policy that is very specific to your situation. Your third option is to use the provincial policy. So I've had churches do this. They've said to me, listen, uh, the provincial policy works for us, and we don't feel that we really need to make any revisions or additions to it. And so they essentially copy and paste the provincial policy and use that as their safe sanctuary policy. Um, you can make additions. So I have, like, Hopewell, for example, is we have taken that provincial policy as our sort of our base, and we are making a couple of updates to that policy, but I would say 95% of it is just that new provincial policy. So how do you decide which option to go with? You need to think about who is using your space. Is it just your church? Do you have scouts that meet and use your space? Do you rent out space to the community? Things like that. What kind of programming does your church do? I know there are churches who do special, like Sunday school programs for folks who have various types of disabilities, for example. So that might need to play into the policy that you choose. How many people are there? How many volunteers and people are we talking about? Who or what is not covered in your current policy, or maybe there's something that's not covered in the provincial policy that you need covered for your church. How much time do you have to create a new policy? Do you have a person or a group of people dedicated, or do you just have zero time? I know somebody said in the registration, there's just no time. And then how and who will train your staff and volunteers on these policy updates? Um, that is something that I have a limited amount of time to help with. So if you go ahead and contact me like now, I can potentially work with you and help you with that process. Um, okay, so let's get into the provincial policy. The goals of the provincial policy. There are three. The first is the most important. We want to demonstrate our commitment to safety and well-being. That's the most important. A secondary goal is to protect staff and volunteers. So a lot of this is written with that in mind, that we want to make sure people have the protection that they need. And then the third goal is to reduce legal liability, not just for the province, but for congregations as well. And so having these policies in place is really a safeguard for everybody, and that includes our congregations and individuals. Okay, so how are we using the provincial policy? If you go with one of the options where you're going to write your own policy, think of the provincial policy as a starting point, as a guideline or a blueprint. It's telling you kind of like a checklist, like you need to include these items. And then there are particular things you need to think about and particular rules that are in place. So, for example, background check and drug tests have to be done. That's not optional. They must be done, and they must be repeated every 3 years. Now, you could decide, well, we want a background check and drug test everyone every year, and that would be fine. That falls within that 3-year rule. You could not say, well, that's really expensive. We have 100 volunteers. We're only going to background check and drug test them every 10 years. That would not comply with the policy. So you can be more strict than the provincial policy, but you cannot remove requirements that are in the policy. I want to emphasize, who does this policy cover? Obviously, it covers provincial events. I think it's pretty obvious it covers churches in the Moravian province, but it also includes groups who use the church property. So, for example, a lot of our churches share their space with scouting groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. Um, those groups would need to follow this policy as well. Um, if you host a vacation Bible school, you still got to follow the safe sanctuary policy. If you share your space with a school, preschool childcare, um, they should also be following this policy as well. Um, so bring in, if your school, if your church shares space with any of those programs, you're going to need to bring on that director of the VBS or the director of the preschool, and make sure that they're aware and understanding um, what the policy is and how to follow it, and that you're giving them space to give feedback for them to say, hey, here's what's working really well, um, or hey, here's what's we're struggling with. Okay, so what does this policy cover? I tried to break it down here. We've got the first thing is really training and documentation. So it lays out you got to train your volunteers. You have to document that you trained your volunteers and staff. And screening is really important. So there, and we will get into more detail, but everyone has to do these background check drug tests before they start working with vulnerable populations. The policy goes into some supervision. The hard and fast rule of supervision is that there must be 2 adults for any group. And then there are some more specific rules for trips, like especially overnight trips. And then there's several sections of the policy that are guidelines for everyone's behavior. So obviously our volunteers, there is an expectation that their language and behavior meets a certain standard. But that's also true for anyone who is at your VBS or who is at your trunk or treat. You have clear expectations that their language and behavior will be appropriate for the setting, that they're not bringing substances to these events, things like alcohol, illegal drugs, etc. There are some standards around cyber safety, some language about bullying, and then some language about weapons as well, which we will get into. I do want to highlight the definitions page. Don't skip over the first couple pages. There's some really important things on there. So for example, an adult, for the purposes of this policy, an adult is any person 21 years of age or older. So keep that in mind. And then also on the first page, I see a lot of people sort of skip the first page, but it does ask churches to set up a safe sanctuary committee to review the safe sanctuary policy and any difficulties around that, and for that group to sort of audit the policy to say like, okay, we had this incident happen. Does this mean that we need to change our policy? Or like, let's review how our policy worked well in this situation. It doesn't have to be negative. The hope is that those groups can make recommendations for changes and that they can also flag like when extra help is needed. And then they can also make recommendations for future provincial policy updates as well. Okay, so let's talk about orientation. Staff and volunteers have to be trained on the safe sanctuary policy before they start and annually after that. If you don't document the training, it didn't happen. So make sure you document the training and keep that documentation in those employee and volunteer files. And you want to make sure everyone signs acknowledging their agreement to abide by the safe sanctuary policy and that they received a copy of the safe sanctuary policy. There's a sample agreement, volunteer agreement in the appendix of the policy. So if you don't have one, don't worry, you can just pull that out and use it. Okay.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
did you guys talk about you know, format of that? I know we talked a little
Yes.
bit about like a spreadsheet that might have,
Mm-hmm.
like the list of those that had been done and like,
Yes.
a column for each of these sort of like, things that we're seeking to
Mm-hmm.
fulfill for each person. And then you can like document like a date for like when each of those things had basically been
Yes.
signed off on. Is that still kind of what we're thinking?
Yes, so that would be, I've seen what you're talking about. So it's usually like an Excel spreadsheet. It's got names on one side, it's got background check date on down, it's got drug test date on down. And then you would want to add orientation date, right? Um,
Signature of the form. Yep.
yes, and signature on the form, like check, yes, we've got that. Um, that is perfection. You would also want to make sure you do have those forms, like those signed forms.
Right.
So
That's in a folder
just
somewhere.
that's in a folder. So hopefully each of your volunteers has a folder and it's got that in there. But then you've got, I love a good spreadsheet because then you can see at a glance, like, oh, I can see the years. I can see everyone who needs their background check updated this year. Um, and so churches do that. Most folks have moved to having that just in a virtual digital format for that spreadsheet. Um, some folks do. I have seen some paper ones as well. I do recommend a digital, and then if you want to have the paper one as a backup, that's fine. But as long as you are documenting it somewhere and it gets updated. Because of course, in a perfect world, all of our volunteers would get background check and drug tested on the same day, and it would just be easy. But that's not how that works. So you have people who start in August, and then you have people who start in January, and it just very quickly gets very messy if you don't have some way to keep track of it. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay. Before, I have had multiple people ask me, uh, we have this person, they're really great, we want them to volunteer. Can they start tonight? And we pinky promise we're gonna do their background check and drug test in the morning. No, please don't do that. You need, before you even think about having someone come on as a volunteer, they should have been involved with the church for at least 6 months. So you don't want somebody who's been coming for a month and then you just throw them in with the youth group. That's not to say they cannot attend church events. Absolutely not. They just can't be one of those two adult leaders that is supervising a group. Okay, so say you've got this really great volunteer, they want to volunteer, they've been with your church for 6 months, you really want them in there. What do you need to do? They need to start with an application that includes references and make sure you actually check the references. Once you've decided, okay, application looks good, references check out, then we move on to the background check. Everyone's got to do the background check and drug test. You can decide if the motor vehicle report is applicable. Are they going to be driving people? If so, they need to complete that. So that has to be done and come back good before they can start or before you offer employment. Okay, da 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 da. Our new background check and drug test procedure. Um, we need to send the following information to Mariah Shelp. Her email address is listed here. It's hr@mcsp.org. Mariah needs to know, first she needs to know which church you're from. Most churches have a church specific email address, but just go ahead and say, "Hey, Mariah, this is so and so from such and such Moravian church. We need to get the following folks set up with a background check and a drug test." So she needs their first name, their last name, their phone number, their email address, and like I already said, the church name. Once you send that email, the Paycom system will take it from there. They will send a link to that applicant for them to complete the background check information and that drug testing information so they can schedule that drug test. Um, this means that there is some information in the provincial policy that is already out of date. Yay. So if you look in the appendix, we still have the background check permission form and the permission to do a drug test. Um, we are no longer using that particular method, so this replaces that. So if you decide we're just going to copy and paste the provincial policy, that is one thing that you will need to edit. And I can help you do that. Just email me. But you would want to put this procedure in there to make sure it's up to date. Are there questions about this? I know this is new.
I have a question. This is Joyce of Rolling Hills, Moravian in Longwood, Florida. And
Hi, Joyce.
hi, how are you? Are current employees and volunteers grandfathered in, or does everyone across the board need to have a background check and drug testing?
So if it has been more than 3 years, or if it's coming up on 3 years since they had a background check or drug test, or if they've never had a background check or drug test on file, then yes, you do need to go ahead and do that as soon as you can.
And I'll offer one sort of point of clarification on that. If someone is a current, like currently on payroll for the province as an employee, they are current.
Yeah,
So
because the
anybody who's currently
Paycom,
receiving, yeah.
yeah,
What if they've had the background check and the drug test because you have to do that to be a counselor at camp?
that's
And
fine.
she does them, so she has it on record. Is that okay?
Yes, Linda, that's a great question. Yes, the Paycom system keeps the record. So, like Linda, if you say we're doing your background check drug test, um, and it's already in there from camp, that counts. So
Okay,
we're not going
good.
to redo it.
Okay.
So if you already go up to camp every year, you don't have to do a separate background check drug test for the church.
Okay.
So if that is your situation, I would say, but you still want to get the paper in the file,
Right.
or you get confirmation, email Mariah, um, and see if you can get that record transferred as essentially.
And Lynn,
From her.
I've
from
got,
her, from Mariah.
Yeah.
Okay, because she's the one that, I talked to do it. So
Hmm.
she should, okay, I see what you're saying. Got it.
Yeah.
Linda,
Yeah.
that was actually one of the reasonings behind the shift to that payroll management system was because it would help us manage this piece of the process so that in those places where there is crossover, for us to be able to like maintain that record across all of our different,
Right. Right.
agencies, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That
I
was one
have
of the
a
goals we were
question on
trying to
that.
achieve.
What does the background check include? For instance, I know that, I'm with a condo board, and it includes if they've had any felonies, any, you know, um, more serious criminal charges. So does it include civil and criminal activities, or
So I know that it's going to include the criminal activities. I'm not sure what civil records it's going to look at. If you want the full breakdown, that would also probably be a Mariah question. Typically, those types of background checks, you can sort of um, check which things you want. But if you want the full breakdown, double check with Mariah. I don't have that in my brain. I know we check criminal. I know it's gonna check like sex offender registries, things like that. But I don't know the specific civil records that it's gonna look at. Typically, they also when Paycom sends that link to the applicant, one of the things that's going to ask for is a social security number. And typically they like double checks that the name that's given and the social security number that are given match and that that's a real social security number, things like that. So you can't just pick a name and pick a number. That's not going to work. So it's also verifying someone's identity, that they are who they say they are.
Right. I've never heard of a background check looking into civil matters. I was just curious, like here we just look into any criminal matters or, sex offenders or predators, which are on their driver's license, attached to their driver's license as well. I was just curious.
Yeah, the only reason I say I'm not sure about the civil, I feel like it did check for something that was technically civil, but I cannot remember. So I would say if you really need the full breakdown of that, ask Mariah and she should be able to give you that.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm.
I have a
Elizabeth,
question,
A
please.
follow-up question.
Yeah.
If a volunteer has been background checked for their job, would
Hmm.
that be sufficient or still need to go through the province?
They would still need to go through the province because we really want to get them in that Paycom system. And typically, the companies that conduct these background checks actually have a rule that you can't share um,
Okay,
the information, like they will not share the information with another entity. So that
okay,
does get a little sticky. Yeah.
thanks.
Good question.
This
I'll
is Verona.
offer,
So this is Verona from
Yeah.
Prince of Peace. I think at this time of the year when you have vacation Bible school and other activities at at our various churches, is that something probably that should have been probably revisited earlier or do we have enough time for churches? I'm not saying that it hasn't been done to get this done in time for vacation Bible school. Since there's the emphasis that yes, we have to have background check for all our volunteers.
So if your VBS starts tomorrow, you're not going to get this back by tomorrow. But if your VBS starts like in a couple weeks, you probably do have time. It like if you email this information to Mariah tomorrow, those background, and then you tell your people, hey, when you get that email, fill it out. Once the information gets in, it does not take long, to get it done.
Yes, I know when we did and we revised our policy, we had everyone there at the time. We even had help from our provincial office when we did. They came down and assisted with that. So, I'm just there will be enough time, but I'm just thinking that if we should send out or maybe reminders to our churches that this is important and needs to be done.
Yes, yes, and we can do that. I'm gonna make a little note to just see if we can send out sort of a mass communication.
Yes, I think that's necessary.
Okay. Yes.
Elizabeth, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Worried something was wrong with my phone. I have a question, and you may have said this, but I just need a little bit of clarification, please.
Huh.
So I have been employed by the Southern Province for 14 years.
Okay.
And so with you were talking about the 3 year mark, being re-drug tested, re-screened and all of that. Would that apply? I can kind of piggybacks off what someone else was asking. Are those of us who have been with employees of the province for multiple years, are we grandfathered in, or if it's been longer than 3 years, do we still need to go through that process again?
Feel free to double check me with Mariah and or
Okay.
Renee.
Okay.
My understanding is that yes, you do need if it's been 3 years or more than 3 years, that you do need to go ahead and get that done.
Okay.
And the process is the same if you're an employee. Just email Mariah at that email address, tell her, give her all that information and tell her exactly who you are and where you work. And
Okay.
she'll get that process started for you. Um, be aware, um, who you need to be very specific about. So say you're at Hopewell Moravian Church and you are doing this because you are going to volunteer at Hopewell. You need to tell her Hopewell Moravian Church. Um,
Gotcha.
because then she's going to bill Hopewell Moravian Church for the cost of that background check and drug test. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just maybe
yeah,
I'm being dim, but I just needed some clarification on that. Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, yes, we all need clarification. And that's a really good question. A lot of folks end up going to camp and that's how they get it done and they just don't think about it. Um,
Oh yeah.
and so one of the things too that we're working on is making sure that, okay, if you don't go to camp, let's make sure that we're keeping track of, okay, it's been 3 years, it's time for you to redo this. So that's a
Sure.
great question. Yeah.
Well, and then I have a second question. We have a treasurer of the church, and
Hmm.
she is not employed. I guess it would be considered a volunteer position. She would
Okay.
also need to go through that process as well, correct?
Um, I'm assuming yes. Does
I'd reach out,
she,
Mariah.
is she a volunteer? Yeah, maybe ask Mariah, is she a volunteer or does she get paid at all?
No, it's an unpaid position.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
but she's very active within the church
Okay.
and yeah. So
So I will say technically, this policy only covers staff and
gotcha.
volunteers who work with children, youth, or vulnerable adults. So if she
Gotcha.
does not work directly with those populations, she may sort of fall through the crack here.
Okay.
Um, I will also say if you have someone who has, it is a good practice if you have someone who has access to sensitive information, that you make it a policy that you just go ahead and have a background check on file for that person.
Okay.
Because you, like Hopewell, we have our treasurer has been the treasurer for 50 years. I don't know if
Gotcha.
he's ever had a background check. Um, but he's not going to be the treasurer forever, right? And
Sure.
so looking towards the future when you may have to change, you may want to make it a policy that anyone who has access to information like that um, would need to get that background check.
Okay. You
That is
got it. Thank
something you could put in your church's safe sanctuary policy.
Okay.
Uh, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. I'll make sure I understood. Are there other questions about background checks and drug testing?
What would
Ye-
happen if you have someone that cleans your church
Uh-huh.
and they possibly could be around,
Are
but he's
they
not paid by the province. He's not paid by the province. He is paid by the church.
okay. Is it one individual or do you employ a company?
No, it's
It's a
just one
family.
individual.
Okay. So again, the safe sanctuary policy doesn't necessarily speak to that unless they are working with those populations. That would be
Okay.
something you could decide as a church, like, hey, this person has access to our buildings. We want to make it a policy that they do this background check.
Right.
I would recommend that you make that a policy. For the same reason as the treasurer, the person you have now, you may have think you have no reason to background check, but they're not going to be in that position forever.
Right.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So for instance, and this is just for clarity, our organist, it's not a paid position. She's
Right.
been an organist for a long time.
Yeah.
But does she needs to have a background check done?
So, does she work with children,
No, but with
youth?
but with the choir or older folks.
So if she's working with elderly folks, just because you're elderly, that doesn't mean you're necessarily in this category, but oftentimes our elderly folks do fall in the category of vulnerable adult for various reasons. So I would strongly consider making that position background checked. The policy does not cover that specific scenario, but it sounds like there's potential for that person to work with vulnerable adults. So my recommendation would be, when in doubt, just go ahead and do a background check.
So,
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
what I wanted to add to that is Florida is an elder care state, and they have very, very strict rules
Yes.
about dealing with the elderly because so many elder persons retire here and live here. So the parameters are very, very stringent for dealing with elderly persons.
That's a really good point. Thank you, Joyce. I meant to say this at the beginning. Our province covers multiple states. So there may be situations where, like this one, where you need to be aware of the local and state laws where your church is. We try to be sensitive to that in writing this policy. But again, things change all the time. So just being aware of that is really important. And if you become aware of a law or a rule, let the other churches around you know. Say, hey, did you know? Because they may not know. So always share things like that. Thank you, Joyce. That's really helpful.
You're welcome. I also have another question because I know at the condo here, background checks are a couple of $100s. Of course, we don't do drug check tests. That would be, illegal. When it comes to residents moving in, is what I'm talking about, or owners. So, who does the responsibility for paying for these background and drug tests fall on? The church or the private?
So the church is responsible for paying for the background check and drug tests. I don't remember the exact number, but it was not as high as it was not in the couple $100 range. That is a Mariah question. I think it would be fine when you send her the email to say, hey, can you remind me how much these cost? But and I'm sorry, I should have double checked this before I got on here, but I think the drug test and background check together are less than $100.
Okay.
So I mean, it can still be an expense if you've got 20 volunteers. That's going to be a good bit. But it's not quite as expensive as what it sounds like you're used to.
Again, that was one of the motivating factors for being able to do it through Paycom and, being able to send it through Co. We get like a corporate price point for that rather than sort of a private party price point. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it helps a lot. Yeah.
Could you clarify something for me, please?
Yes, I'll try.
We are, and my question was like, I want to make sure I'm understanding who has to be drug background and drug tested we have like 43 children's church volunteers. Some of them do it one Sunday of the year.
Uh-huh.
Does that, so are all 43 supposed to be drug tested to lead children's church?
So if they're working directly with children, yes, they do need to be background checked and drug tested.
Is that something new?
It's not, it's been part of safe sanctuary policies for a while. I don't know exactly the year that started.
Well, I
But
know
it's
we updated ours in 2022, and
uh-huh.
I can't remember who at the time we were talking with, but we
Uh-huh.
were told that those people, like they uh, did one time a year like that, they would not have to be. But now you're telling me they do.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I have a clarifying question for you. When you say they're leading children's church, let me just make sure I understand. Is it because I'm thinking children's church, it's like in a separate space from the sanctuary where the adults are?
Correct.
So the folks, you've got hopefully a couple folks each
Yes.
Sunday, and they're taking the kiddos. Maybe they've got another space that's set up for the children.
Correct.
Okay. So it sounds like you've got a couple of adults who are supervising a group of children. So it's not like they're in the sanctuary with their families and they're just going up to the front to have like a children's message. They are going to a separate room, and they're doing a program of some kind for the children. So yeah, they do need to be background check and drug tested.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Are there other thoughts about that? We can circle back if so. I'm gonna move on to a little bit to supervision. Um, so the rule in the safe sanctuary policy is that there must be two adults for any group. So, for example, if you've got several Sunday school classrooms that you're using, each group or each classroom needs to have two adults. The
Okay, don't bother.
The recommendation part of this is the ratios. You'll see in the safe sanctuary policy, there's a little chart with recommended ratios. That is not a hard and fast rule. That is a recommendation. So, for example, it recommends that if you have an infant nursery, that that infant nursery have no more than 4 babies for every adult that's in the room. Does that make sense as far as supervision? There's got to be 2 adults, but you might need more than 2 adults. Okay. I'm going to briefly go over outings.
Before
I know,
before you move on, as it
yeah,
relates to the two adults, are there any restrictions regarding those adults should not be related by blood or
yes. So they should preferably, so for example, you've got your Sunday school class. Preferably they're not related. So preferably you don't have a mother and a daughter supervising that Sunday school class. So if you have a mother daughter and they both volunteer, put them in separate groups. They can each volunteer, they just need to be in separate groups. And it would be the same thing with outings. You want to have a variety of leaders. You need to have male leaders and female leaders. You need to have boys and girls separate for their sleeping arrangements. Make sure they have private areas to change. And if you have a wide range of ages, so say you have middle and high school, try to separate those activities as much as possible. General guidelines, everyone has to have permission. You can't just take kids. You got to get permission to take them on the trip. And provide their families with an itinerary. Tell them where they're going and what they're doing. And then any applicable laws need to be followed. So wear your seatbelts, you're not texting and driving, and the group is staying together. So kiddos are not just going off by themselves in without adult supervision. Okay, so there is a section on bullying, and so make sure you look at that and include something about bullying in your policy. Again, this is a good place if you don't have anything to add where you can just pull directly from the provincial policy. So we've got some definitions of bullying. It can include actions, words, behavior that is repeated or targets an individual. It can be aggressive, it can be exclusion, it can look like a lot of different things. So we tried to include a broad definition of it so that you can recognize it when you see it. The goal is to intervene to stop bullying. So you want to separate folks who are engaging in those behaviors. And you want to, if you have to do that, you want to document, you want to record that you did what you did and why. And you may want to have a conversation with an adult in both children's lives. Okay. So I want to touch on substances a little bit. In the volunteer covenant in the appendix, as well as in the policy, it's stated a couple times that possession or use of tobacco, alcohol, or illegal drugs at events for children, youth, vulnerable adults is prohibited. And I have had a couple folks ask about this, that it's really hard to regulate possession. And so I don't imagine that you are searching people's pockets for a vape pen or a pack of cigarettes. But if someone showed up to your trunk or treat and they had a case of beer, that wouldn't go over very well. So the reason this is in the policy is to set up an expectation for your events. If an event is for children and youth, you don't want to allow or have things going on that don't reflect that. So just making it very clear in your communication with your volunteers, with your parents, etc., that the expectation is that you will not bring or use these items while you're here. So again, I'm not expecting you to like do a pat down security check and be looking for cigarettes, but that you set the expectation for behavior at these events and that you make the expectation clear. And that may seem obvious, but sometimes it's not. Okay, there is a section on violence or threats, and it basically just defines what violence can look like, and it's not just unwanted physical contact. It could include destroying property. It could include aggressive speech, making threats and things like that. So again, you want to make folks aware what your standard is for behavior in your space and at your events. So this might seem obvious, but again, it's not always obvious. So make it clear that in your policy and in communications that this type of behavior is not acceptable and you're not going to tolerate it. If you use off-duty police, there's a section on that to help you decide when it might be appropriate to use them, some considerations around liability insurance, and clarify roles. So if you want to use off-duty police and you also have, say, ushers who are used to filling that security role, they're walking the perimeter or checking entrances and those kinds of things, make sure that you have that conversation with the ushers to say, hey, we're going to use off-duty police. Here's what they're responsible for, and here's what you're responsible for, so that they're not clashing, and so that the off-duty police are also aware, hey, these are our ushers. You may see them walking around outside. So you're just making that communication clear. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about weapons. And I'll pause after this slide if anyone has questions. So weapons of any kind, including firearms, explosive devices, etc., are prohibited at events or activities that are specifically geared towards youth, children, or vulnerable adults. The recommendation is to disallow weapons and to display appropriate signage at all entrances to the building or to the event that's being sponsored. So that is something that you will have to decide as a church, if you're going to put those signs up and how you're going to go about doing that. Keep in mind, if your church has a school or a childcare, you may be required to disallow weapons during school hours. So this also gets into specific state laws. So if you are in North Carolina, the North Carolina legislature, within the last couple of years, I think it was 2024, changed the rule so that if your church met in the same space where a school was, that it still had to be a weapons-free zone during school hours, but that the church could decide if it was going to be weapons-free on Sunday morning. So that is the current situation for that in North Carolina. So as you're making this decision, double check those local and state laws regarding weapons and church and how that works. That law, again, was changed recently in North Carolina. That's something, no matter what your church decides, you need to be aware of those rules and how they apply to your situation. Okay, so we've talked about what's in the policy as far as weapons. We talked about what to be aware of legally as far as weapons. Does anyone have questions specifically related to weapons? Okay, let's move on. We're almost done.
I do. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So something that's come up in our conversations is we do have gentlemen during Sunday service who provide safety for the church. And I do happen to know a couple of them are carrying concealed weapons when they're monitoring cameras and so forth during a church service. But we've got children running all over the place.
Right.
So what, I know that's a concern. Like,
sure.
What about them when they are, you know, providing safety that in our area we feel we need?
Yeah. So a couple clarifying questions. It sounds like these are church volunteers who are volunteering to provide a security, essentially, but it's a volunteer role that they are taking on.
Yes.
You said you happen to know that they are carrying. Is that something that everybody kind of knows, but they don't talk about? Or
I don't know. I just happen to.
Is it like if you want to be on the security team at this church, a weapon is issued to you?
I know there are men who, I know there are people who are sitting in that room that are not as well. So, but I do.
It's not a requirement. Okay.
Right. It's not a requirement, but I do know that some of them are.
So that would be a consideration. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, they are wanting to protect, just in case, as we know, news stories all over the place.
Yeah.
One of them
Yeah.
is a law enforcement officer.
Okay, that was another question I had. Are any
I
of
know,
them like,
or he was. I do not know if he currently is.
gotcha?
But because I'm still fairly new to Friedland, so I'm still
Yeah.
learning a lot about everybody.
Yeah.
But I do know a few of them are carrying.
Mhm.
They're
Yeah.
sitting in a room monitoring cameras just to make sure.
Right. Um, so I will say, this is another area where it's not specifically covered in the policy. The policy's assuming, I think when this section was written, the intention was folks who are coming to an event, who are coming to church,
Right.
who are coming to whatever, um, it is very clear what the church's expectation is. So it is very clear if the church does not want you to bring a weapon, that the church makes that very clear.
Okay.
And that is to protect the church, because if someone brings a weapon and you say, "Hey, we don't want you to have a weapon here," and there's no sign, you don't have a lot of
Right.
legal standing as a church to do anything about the fact that that person brought a weapon, unless, God forbid, they use that weapon. Right? So if you just notice that this visitor is openly carrying a weapon that is legal to have, and you feel uncomfortable with it, and you want to ask that person to stop, it's going to be really hard to enforce that unless you have clearly posted signage.
So basically, our safe policy would need to say, unless you are providing safety, security, or part of the safety security team, you're not allowed to have weapons.
Right.
Okay.
And you're going to need to write that very carefully.
Yeah.
And then decide, again, the signage is a recommendation. It's not a requirement. It's a strong recommendation, because of that reason, because we want people to know what their rights are as a church and to understand how to set it up so that you have that ability to say, "Hey, our expectation and our standard that we've set for our community is that you don't bring a weapon. You brought a weapon. We're going to ask you to put that in your car." And hopefully that's as far as that goes. But if that person says, "No, I'm allowed to have a weapon," and you don't have a sign, then what? What happens then? So just keep that in mind. And that was the mindset that policy was written in. It was not written to say, "Oh, if you've got a off-duty police officer working security, make sure they don't bring their weapon." Um, that was not the intent. And so I would say the security team was also not necessarily part of that consideration. But you want to think really carefully about, like, that was why I asked, is it the expectation? Is it an expectation that if you join the security team,
I don't know. I'm not a part of the security team.
Right. Do they train on this? Like, do they document? There's lots of questions I have, and maybe, I can chat with somebody there, and hopefully be helpful with that. But
I just know that was something that came up in our conversation.
gotcha.
So I just
Well,
wanted
I
to bring
hope
it up.
this is helpful, just knowing sort of the why behind this section.
Yeah.
And I'm actually gonna sit down with the elders and talk about some of this stuff in a couple weeks. So
I'll be there.
perfect. So hopefully this will be helpful for that conversation. Do you have other questions about
No,
weapons?
I know that was the one thing
That's
that
a
popped
big
up
one.
in some conversations.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that question. That's helpful. Someone asked, I'm sorry, I forgot to say at the beginning, I am recording this, and so it will be made available. So if you have to leave early, or if you want to share this with somebody, the recording will be made available later. Okay, enough about weapons. Let's talk about the internet. There are some sections in this policy specifically related to cyber safety. You could have a whole policy about internet safety, but you just got, I think, a couple of pages. So remember that the internet is public and nothing posted on the internet ever really goes away. So with that in mind, make sure you get permission to post images or videos or whatever you are going to post. Even if you have permission, do not post personal information like a picture of a child with their name or their address or a phone number. You don't want to post information like that. Always keep privacy in mind when you're posting. So that's the general internet safety part of this. The other part of this is that more and more adults and children and youth are on social media. And so adults want to be careful how they engage online with children, youth, and vulnerable adults. So you want to avoid like direct messaging the youth one-on-one on, I don't know, Instagram, for example. You really don't want to do that. If you need to post about the youth group, do so publicly. Say, hey, such and such Moravian Church youth, we are having a pizza party on this day at this time. And then if you need to send a more targeted message, move that to email and send it to the whole group. Say, hey guys, don't forget our pizza party is this day and this time. You don't want to miss it. We're going to play whatever the fun game of the week is. Another piece of this is that when you do email, again, just protect everyone's information. Go ahead and use that BCC, that blind carbon copy. So if you are emailing, especially if you're emailing a group that is mixed of adults, youth, a mixed group, and you may have access to those youth emails, but every single adult on that list may not have access to those youth emails. So go ahead and blind carbon copy so there's no question of sharing a child's information with folks when you probably didn't even mean to. So get comfortable with that blind carbon copy button. It will really help you out. And a lot of adults really prefer that as well. So those were the main points of cyber safety. Are there specific questions about internet safety or policies about engaging with folks online? Okie dokie. We'll go ahead and move on. When you read the policy, only about half the policy is actual policy. The other half is the appendix. Make sure you continue your perusing into the appendix. It has things that hopefully will be helpful to you. It has example applications. It has an example like volunteer covenant. Lots of things so that when you're thinking, oh man, I need to make an application for my volunteers to fill out, you don't have to create one from scratch. There's one in the appendix for you to use. Now, if that one doesn't work for you, feel free to make your own, or feel free to pull that one out of the appendix and modify it so it does work for you. So if you're looking at something in the appendix and you're saying, well, that won't work, it does not include this piece of information that I need, feel free to edit it so that it works for your situation. Items in the appendix, think of those as more like guidelines, again, that you are free to take and use, and hopefully it is helpful to you. Okay, future updates. The goal with this policy update is not that this is the end all be all of safe sanctuary policies. The goal is that we have more frequent policy updates in the future. And so for that to happen, we need feedback. We need to hear from you what works, what doesn't work, what you have questions about, what's really difficult, or what was really difficult and how you were able to work through it. So, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. If you have a really great idea, if you're like, hey, next time we update this policy, can we do this? Maybe. I'm basically keeping a running list of things that potential future updates. And if you want to help write the next policy update, please let me know. I'll put your name on a list. That is all that I have for right now. We have a little time left on our meeting, so I can take questions if there are any. Or I have a question. I will say, as you leave, let me know what you need. And if I have a resource that's helpful for that, I'm happy to send it. Or if the resource that you need is me, I'm happy to email you separately and we'll set something up. So does anyone have questions at this time?
Elizabeth, this is Ken Carden from Unity Moravian Church.
Hi there.
Hi there. Question. We rent our sanctuary to a lady that provides voice and some music lessons,
Oh.
couple of evenings a week.
Mm-hmm.
She's bringing in people from outside. Not our youth are not particularly involved, but they could be. They contract with her independently. What's our obligation in regard to the two adult policy and the drug test and background screen?
That's a really good question. So what I'm hearing is that she is working with youth and or children. Is she working with them, like are parents dropping them off and leaving, or are parents staying?
It's a combination. Some parents drop them off, some stay elsewhere in our narthex waiting for it to be over, but there's
Okay,
no hard and fast rule about what's going on there.
gotcha. Because my first thought is the easiest way to make this sort of work for everybody would just be for her to ask parents to stay. And so then you've got the parent present, and that would eliminate a lot of potential issues. But I will say, generally speaking, the safe sanctuary policy, if it's happening in the church, the policy needs to be followed. So it sounds like you probably need to have a conversation with this person, and talk to her about the policy and the requirements and see if y'all can come up with something that will meet the requirements of the policy and allow her to still use the space. So would she be willing to do a background check and drug test? Would she be willing to help pay for the background check and drug test? Are all going to be questions you want to talk to her about. And then would the parents of those kiddos be willing to stick around for those lessons? I think that would be the easiest solution. I'm happy to talk with you some more about that if you feel like that's needed.
I
Okay,
just
I'll
want
talk with the group that really got this going and see if they have any insights.
Okay, perfect. Well, reach out if you need more help on that.
Thank you.
Elizabeth,
I know.
Yes.
I would like to speak with you about that as well. We have a music school that rents our space,
Uh-huh.
and they use a space on the third floor in the education building. And I would like to talk to you about that as well when you have a second.
Okay. Does that need to be it probably does need to be separate from tonight. Can I email you and we set up a phone call?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. I will add that to my list.
Okay.
So another
And that
option.
was Joshua, right?
Yes, it was Joshua.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
There might be another option to consider. I know a music teacher that has, minors in his studio all the time, and what he does is he has a video camera set up in case the parents don't want to stay, or he frequently doesn't want the parents there because it interferes with the students' performance during lessons. And the video is great because they can just look anytime. The parents can look at what has actually gone on during that lesson. So that may be another option.
Yeah, I'm writing that down, Joyce. That sounds really intriguing. And
I don't know
another situation that's not specifically addressed in our policy. So that's going on my list.
and I think it's relatively inexpensive to have little videos set up. But when I heard that he does it, I thought that's a great idea, because you're completely covered that way,
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned earlier, that we share our space with another congregation, all right? So,
Yes.
while we're having our regular worship service in the sanctuary, they are engaged in Sunday school in the fellowship hall. So, by the time we're out of our regular service on a Sunday morning, they're getting ready to come into the sanctuary for their service, right? Now, as it relates to the Save Sanctuary policy, fine, I understand that we'll have to have conversations with them regarding that. But as it relates to background checks and all of that, who would be responsible for that cost?
So it sounds like there are two congregations
Mhm,
sharing the same space.
mhm.
But it also sounds like your programs sort of run parallel. So they're separate. They're at the same time, but separate. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. So both parties are responsible for following the safe sanctuary policy. Um, each congregation is going to be responsible for the cost of those background check and drug tests for their volunteers.
Okay, so in essence, am I hearing you say that it is our responsibility to enforce the policy in terms of to ensure that their staff are background checked? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so you are going to have to be the one to say, hey, friends, we are required to follow this policy. Let's help get you up to speed, make sure they have the information, and make sure they're aware that they're required to follow it. But you are not required to pay for their background check and drug test. It sounds like they're a separate congregation. So it would be fine for you to say to them, this is your financial responsibility.
Yeah, they're actually renting space from us, so yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be fine, but it is your responsibility to start that conversation to make them aware of the policy, and to help them. Like if they say, hey, we don't understand the policy, um, either help by explaining or reach out to me and say, hey, help us help them figure out what needs to happen. So
Okay,
that's another
perfect.
situation where I'm happy to help if I can be helpful.
Okay,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. Okay, we've got like 2 more minutes. Are there any last minute questions before we say goodbye? All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. I hope this was helpful. If you have lingering questions, or if you are still thinking, okay, that answered some of my questions, but I'm still not sure what is the most appropriate choice for our congregation, please reach out. You can email me, and I'm happy to do a phone call, a Zoom meeting, or I might even be able to drop by your space, which is helpful because then I can see your space. So don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to chat. I'm happy to answer questions. Like you've heard, I'm happy to even attend a meeting or come see your space and hopefully help you figure out what makes sense for you at this time.